Myles, I do have a book here that I've heard tell you recommend, and I'd love to know what you recommend it for and why this
Oh,
book. And that book
oh,
is The Melancholy Death of Oyster Boy
oh,
and
fantastic.
Other Stories by Tim
Oh,
Burton.
great. Oh, brilliant. Oh, great. Thanks for doing your research. That's fantastic.
Of course.
Yeah, so I recommended that book, or that poem specifically, actually, The Melancholy Death of Oyster Boy by Tim Burton, because, well, I'm a big believer in poetry generally, and I think it really helps not just in life, but also with speech coaching for a number of reasons. And that one is quite a nice, accessible piece. It's pretty bleak, but it's quite accessible. And I think for people who want to au fait with poetry or find that quite intimidating, just dropping the name Tim Burton in, I think, brings in a sense of relevance and a sense of recognizing somebody. And it's just a really good piece. We usually concentrate on the first 3 or 4 stanzas of that poem. It's quite a long poem. It's definitely worth reading. But that piece is just really, really effective because the wordplay is very nice. And the story, as I say, it's pretty bleak, but it's got a good rhythm to it. And with all good poems, it forces you to be emotive and expressive. So if I'm working with somebody who's worried about that they are not putting any expression or emotion into their stories, into their presentations, into just the way they use their voice, they will usually say to me, I don't think I'm very expressive. I don't think I'm very emotional when I speak. And I always find a poem sort of knocks down that barrier because it just forces you to be expressive in the same way that a children's book that you're reading to a young child forces you to be expressive as well. I'm still yet to meet that person who reads a bedtime story to a child as once upon a time there were 3 little bears and the 3 little bears. There is something there. You lift it to something beyond you. It might be an exaggerated part of you, but it just lifts you to a new plane. So I'm thrilled you've got that book to hand because it's a really great piece. And poetry is fantastic anyway. It just slows us down.
Yeah, I thumbed through it. I got it. As I was doing research, I was like, oh, I need to order this book. And
Right.
obviously, very most of it is like illustrations, and then you've got like your one word sentences and whatnot.
Yeah.
But I love it. Like there's this one poem. It's James. It's just one sentence. Unwisely, Santa offered a teddy bear to James, unaware that he had been mauled by a grizzly bear earlier that year.
I know. It's brilliant.
Classic
It's a
Tim
lovely
Burton.
anthology. It's a lovely anthology. There is such a great selection in there. And I think, again, if you were looking to anybody listening to this and thinking, oh, what do I go to? Where do I go for a poem? Getting an anthology of a particular poet, or there's some great poetry books out there. There's a lovely one called A Poem Every Day or 365 Poems. And it's just a real mixture of old and new, traditional, bleak. And with that particular book, it goes through the seasons, which is quite nice. So you get a nice sense of what's going on and to put a nice idea to the poem you're reading. I'm thrilled you got that, Chase. Well done. Full
Oh, thank you.
marks.
Thank you. I also got another poetry book recently. It's Matthew McConaughey's Green Lights, but then the poem book. I do
Fantastic.
have a sense of, and this is probably just me, I don't have a history of reading poetry, and it's definitely something I'd want to get into after listening to you speak about it, and then also just appreciating the art of writing and like the literature that goes along with it. I feel like I don't feel like I know how to read it. Like, do I read a poem and then take time? Do I think about it? Do I read one poem a day? And am I like not getting enough out of it if I'm reading a lot? How do I both utilize poetry for my speaking, but also for just the appreciation of the art that it is?
Yeah, it's a fine question. And I think what I'm going to say to you actually falls into both of those categories. Read it out loud.
Okay.
Just as soon as you open it, just read it aloud. Just to yourself, or if you've got an audience there of your partner or your child, feel free to read it to them, of course. But as soon as you start to make that sound and connection, that's when the understanding, I think, comes in. So you might stumble upon a word that you've never heard before. Great opportunity to jump on your phone, look at the definition, And hey presto, you've added a new word to your vocabulary. And also, once you air the sound and air that particular poem out into the ether, then you can start to almost sort of understand and connect with it. And as you read it, because it's new, and let's not forget, doing a cold read is one of the most terrifying things in the world sometimes, because we are so much in our heads all the time. And for you to put yourself out there with a piece of text that might have been written 150 years ago can be quite intimidating. So take that challenge on. Just read it out loud first and foremost and feel how that rhythm is, or feel how your first attempt felt, and then think, actually, I'm going to do it again. And I might read it as though I were a philosopher, or I might read it as though I am a dean at a very prestigious Ivy League college. How can I put a different character to it and see how that changes things? And again, that sense of play and playing with the sound is a really effective way for you just to get used to not only how your voice is, but how it can be, and a new way of looking at how you use your voice. So as you're thumbing through Matthew McConaughey's book, which I haven't read, I must confess, so you have to tell me what you think of it, or the Tim Burton, read it out loud. You know, with the Oyster Boy one, he proposed in the dunes, they were wed by the sea. Their 9-day-long honeymoon was on the Isle of Capri. So just read it out and see what happens. The first time you do it, it might not be your best. But hey, isn't that with everything in life? I'm sure the first time you did a pull-up or something, or a press-up or a deadlift, it probably wasn't the best one you're ever going to do. So don't let that put you off. And I think people are intimidated by poetry, and that perhaps is because it wasn't taught particularly well. They had
Mhm.
a bad experience at school. There's a line, I don't get it, sometimes comes in quite a lot with that. But read it out loud because it slows you down. Like, as I always say, it's like eating chocolate properly. You take one bite, let it sit on your tongue, feel what it feels like, and then do it again, and then see what sensations you get. And taking a great big pause from this massive wheel of life that we're all running along. And, you know, it's great to hear that you wake up super early as well, Chase, because this idea of bringing reading into your daily routine early, and also getting the voice warmed up and woken up nice and early. So the first time you use your voice, if you get up at 4:30 and your first call isn't until 9 a.m., don't let 9 a.m. be the first time you make a sound.
I do. I utilize reading in the morning. It's the first thing that I do. I wake up,
Fantastic.
I get some water, get some electrolytes in me, and then I sit down with a book. And I'm currently reading a hard copy, and then I utilize a Kindle as well for the very reason when I discover new words, you can just long press and it'll just give you the
Cool.
definition right there. And another cool feature is it actually saves all of the words into like a flashcard vocabulary. And then you can just go
Amazing.
through it and learn those new words. So I use
Fantastic.
that in the evening. But I'm currently reading Ryan Holiday's The Obstacle is Away, and I'm pairing that with Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Beautiful writing, beautiful literature, and the way he composes words. Both Marcus Aurelius, from 2,000 years ago, but also Ryan. He's a great writer. He owns a bookstore. He has a history of
Yeah.
writing. So it's good to see those types of um, the difference, comparing it to like a current day writer and also somebody who wrote a book, a journal that they didn't intend anybody to read, Marcus Aurelius, and you can kind of see those things. So would
Yeah.
you recommend me reading maybe some of those meditations out loud to warm up my voice to get going, or how would you recommend I do that?
Just read it out loud.
Yeah.
And I think this is, and it sounds quite a very simple instruction, but you'll be surprised at the sheer success you'll have from that piece of simplicity. Just sitting there and reading something out, just as I say, it puts the brakes on and it makes you think about not just what you're saying, but how you're saying it. And you suddenly realize, you go, actually, I've got a lot of power, actually. I can change the inflection, I can change the subtext, I can change the sound, I can change the meaning of what I'm saying. And anything that just makes you stop, look, and consider is, in my book, a really great thing to do. So yeah, with your meditation book or the other one that you're reading, just vocalize it. Just
Yeah.
get the sound working earlier. It's as simple as that. And you can just get used to these lovely, gorgeous words in the air. When you find a word, you think, oh, that feels nice to say. I'm going to bring that into a sentence today. Or I might bring that into a sentence this week and see if anybody notices. Make a little sort of challenge to yourself to do that and see if anybody picks up on it or not. They probably won't, because some people just, it's not a big deal to them. So just read it out loud, Chase, and I think you'll find some real success there. And enjoy this lovely, gorgeous language that you and I speak. That great and glorious thing, the English sentence, as Churchill said. So just enjoy and relish those words. And, we've got so many at our disposal. And this is how we deepen that pool of our own lexicon. It's just by bringing these new words in, appreciating them, saying them, and then bringing them into our day to day. That's how we deepen and widen our vocab. So we're not stuck in this shallow pool of likes, so, and, literally, basically, and those other
You
joyous
knows.
little words. They're very effective, but they can sort of harness us and keep us back.
Why is talking to camera so much harder than talking to guests? I don't know. Guys, new year, new goals. 2026, my focus is making this podcast as good as it can get. That means better production. That means more guests more often. So starting March, we are shifting to 2 guests every single week, every Monday and Thursday, with the plan being to drop episode 129 December 31st. I believe that's a Thursday. So if that sounds like something you guys want to be a part of, please subscribe, follow, leave a rating, do all of that. I'm doing everything I can to make this podcast great. We've got some awesome guests lined up. I can't wait to talk to them. I can't wait for you guys to hear it. Now let's get back to the episode. Thank you. There is a speaking coach who's recently, maybe not recently, it's been a couple of years, but he's been viral a lot. Vin, I can't remember his last name.
Yeah,
But
he's fantastic.
yeah,
He
he's
is fantastic.
he's very good, and he talks about your voice as an instrument, the 88 keys of a piano, and how most people are speaking in one octave. I find myself doing it right now, and listening to you talk, and listening to your pauses and your ups and your downs, and it's so much. It's much more engaging. And how can people push themselves outside of the octave to utilize more of their voice?
So it's just by vocalizing as soon as you wake up and vocalizing more. I think the modern world encourages us not to speak particularly well. And it encourages us not to speak much at all, really. You can send a text, you can send a WhatsApp, you can send a DM. You don't need to really engage with your vocals particularly much. But if you just have a bash and do it and get used to doing it. So, for example, if I'm working with somebody who's putting together a keynote, for example, I'm helping them put together this keynote and everything. One of the first things we'll do way before the pen has hit the pad is I'll just say, okay, what do you want to say in this speech? If I had to say, kick off now, go, and they'll go, oh, well, I've got no idea. But as soon as they step into that and start to formulate something, okay, it won't be 100% finished and fantastic, but we've started the procedure of removing everything from here and us living up here to living a little bit up here, but more out here, more outwardly with the vocals. That then means that we can start to formulate better ideas and make decisions a lot earlier. And that decision could be, what is the variety? What is the change? What is the dynamical change I want to put into my voice? Because when you're familiar with what you're doing, then you can afford yourself the position to play with the sound ever so slightly. Okay, I might pause here and I'll start again, a mere 2 seconds later or 1 second later. That's how that relationship happens, because we're not getting stuck up here. We all sound amazing up here. We all do. But if we're living up here all the time, and the first time we use our mouth to deliver this piece is on the day of the event, for example, it's not going to make a happy experience. Okay, you might do okay, and that's fine, but it could put you off from speaking professionally, or speaking in public, or speaking aloud, or allowing yourself the freedom to express your ideas. and removing that sort of sense of judgment. So just speaking more, speaking often, especially when we're seeking to create something. And for example, I'm sure when you started your podcast or started doing content, you might have sat there with your phone out on the street and thinking, what do I want to say? Where do I
Mhm.
want to go with this? The best thing to do, hit record, get going, see what happens. Take it from there, almost lowering the stakes, as it were. So if we can lower the stakes, then we give ourselves the freedom to play and explore and relish and appreciate the different colors of our voice.
So you're saying the conversation doesn't necessarily have to be, you don't, it doesn't have to be a conversation. It doesn't have to be with somebody. Just the act of speaking to a
Yeah,
camera, to yourself, is going to get
yourself.
that improvement. Something that I've been doing to utilize that is I just created a TikTok page, just put my name on it, didn't follow anybody, didn't do any. And then one time a day, every single day, I just press record, one take, and I talk for at least a minute, usually get to two,
Yeah.
whatever's on my mind, just to practice that speaking. And it's made a significant difference.
Of course, because shock horror, Chase, you're getting the reps in. It's exactly what it is. If I can keep going, get used to that rhythm, then me speaking to a stranger, speaking to a new client, speaking to a potential suitor isn't as terrifying as I thought it was to begin with, because I've got used to what's going on here. I've got used to the variety of sound that I can play with, because there are so many colors to our voices, and sometimes we might not ever use them, and that's fine, but it's wonderful to know that you can, should you want to. And that's an amazing driver of heightening our status. To know that you can do. You might not do it, but I can if I want to, is incredibly liberating. And it makes us operate in a much more effective space from that point of view. So I'm thrilled to hear you do that. That's such a good exercise. Because again, putting it to a TikTok platform means that there's a bit more, there's formality to that. There's a bit more of a direction to that. I sometimes do that to my clients. I'll say, okay, every morning for this week, you're sending me a 30-second video of you talking about any subject, you're making a cup of tea, the speech that you're doing in 3 weeks' time. Just get used to this idea of you speaking aloud, because not many people have to do it these days.
I don't want people to think I'm original, because I stole that from Michael Smoke. He talks about posting on that TikTok his like 1 minute public speaking challenge. I don't scroll on TikTok. I literally, if I open the app, I'm hitting record and then I'm posting and ghosting
No
is what I
way.
call it. I just get it out there, get it into the ether. There's some risk. There's the risk for public ridicule, for my opinions to be subjected to other people's, and that's great. And if I want to, I can go back and look to see if there's any comments. But it's been a great exercise. Something that I've noticed that you utilize a lot is the pause. Do you feel like people are uncomfortable with a pause and that's why they don't use it? They always have to be talking?
Yeah, I think there's a misconception that the more I speak, the more in charge and the more confident and the more intelligent I appear and sound. And to my mind, it's usually the complete opposite. Because the person you're speaking to has only got capacity to take on so much. And your audience or the person you're speaking to is going to stop listening at some point. So a pause. And I mean, Chase, you and I are speaking quite sort of casually and conversational now. I don't think we are altering anything dramatically. We could be chatting over a coffee. I've got a
Mm-hmm.
tea, but it's that, you get the idea. Now, when you're speaking to somebody in a conversation, you lean into the natural grammar and punctuation that you use anyway. So you'll pause on a comma and you'll stop on a period and you'll change subject or change dynamic to the start of a new sentence. And I find that with some people who I'm working with, especially in the corporate field, they will just forget all about that. And they'll stand up and they'll speak in very long sentences that go on for days, paragraph long sentences with no point to pause. And the pause is really effective for a number of reasons. One, it gives your audience a chance to absorb the level of insight you've just given. But it also gives you the ability to think, where the hell am I going next? Yes. If you give yourself a vocal elbow room, you can see and hear where you want to go. Because you want your thoughts and stories to be heard and considered and discussed. But if you're flying through at a rate of knots, I just can't take it all on. So I will just stop listening. I'm a fickle, lazy audience member. I will just stop. And people do this all the time. You know, they think the more I speak, the more intelligent I appear. But let's not forget that the shy person sometimes speaks a lot in a nervous state. You know, there's a caricature of the bumbling guy asking a girl out for a date, and well, if you want to come to the date, but it's fine if you don't want to. But if you want to go, we're really great, and we go together. It's too chaotic and it's too much. So just by speaking in thoughts is what I always say. Speak in thoughts, because that is what we do when we're having a conversation. And it's that sense where we bring these two worlds together of social speech and corporate speech, that, you know, ridiculous term, but we bring them much closer together, and then we sense what's actually going on there and see what's actually happening. And that's where true authenticity comes from. Recognizing I haven't got a corporate voice and a social voice. I have a voice. I have one voice, one tongue. There might be a variance in vocal efforts and delivery, of course. I'm not going to, if I was speaking to a room of 5,000 people, it would be slightly elevated and not as intimate as you and I speaking now, for example. Of course, that is true. But it is just one and the same. And that takes a while to sort of break through with some of my clients and some individuals that I've worked with in the past. We have to go through this level of just thinking, okay, it's a conversation. There might be 5,000 people out there. Just imagine you're speaking to me or one person over a coffee. Because that's where real insight and thought-driven conversation comes from. So people are scared of the pause. For one, what do I do in a pause? Do I just stand there? It's incredibly exposing to leave your thoughts there and just to stand and wait for a response or gauge a response. It's nerve-wracking, that space, but there's so much power and authority in that silence. And I think when people appreciate that this sound and this space is there to give the audience the room to reverberate with those particular levels of insight that you're giving. A piece of insight that you worked out 20 years ago, so to you it's just common knowledge, but to the poor person on the fourth row, this is the first time they've heard it. You have the ability to change that person's life or to give them something to consider as they go home from this conference or this presentation. So, you know, don't throw it away. Just because it's second nature to you doesn't mean it's second nature to somebody else.
That's a really good point. I had the opportunity to go get lunch with two of my friends that came into town from out of state. And the conversation turned to the podcast, and they said they listened and it was great. And they were, you know, singing the praises as good friends should.
Quite right too, Chase. Quite right too.
But we turned to it, and I started to give my thoughts. And outside of, you know, in my day to day with my friends, with, as you say, you have that natural, you lean into your normal cadences and your vocabulary. And I was like, when I speak outside of the podcast, I always feel like I'm so precise and concise, and I get my point across and I stop talking. And then often, because I want to be professional, I want to take it seriously, I review all of my podcasts and I take notes and I mark down my likes and my ums and my ahas, and I look at my expressions, and I'm like, I ramble. I talk. I got my point across 6 different times, and I tried to make it the best way possible so everybody could get it instead of just speaking and being clear and concise.
It's an interesting point, that, and it's something that even I have to work on sometimes. I think as coaches, we sometimes do run the risk of, you know, really hammering home a piece of learning to really make sure it's understood. And I think that's correct. But once you've, as you say, hammered it home 6 times in 6 different varieties, and your client or the person you're speaking to got it at attempt 2, have the authority and the power to think, right, this period's going to come now. I'm going to stop the sound now. Stopping the sound is sometimes way trickier than starting the sound. How do I stop this thing? Where do I put the period? What happens there? Because it takes a point of analysis and reflection. And I'm thrilled to hear that you review your podcast episodes, because you're in a lovely, unique position where you've got a record of so many hours of footage that you can just jump into. And I'm working with some of my clients who are podcasters and influencers. It's a great exercise. I'll often say, right, let's go back to video one. Oh, no, not video. And we'll go right back there. And then we'll watch the one they did yesterday. And okay, look, here we go. Look at what we've done. This was before we were working together as well, this point here. Look where we are now. Because I think we are quite hard on ourselves anyway, generally. Well, I certainly am. I can certainly afford to be a bit kinder with myself on occasion. So those points of reflection and evaluation are really effective. And I know I'm giving myself that headspace, those moments in the morning. I go on my non-negotiable walk every day. I might read a piece every morning just to get things going. Going for a walk and talking to yourself nice and early is great because there's nobody around to think who's this madman walking around the lake spouting off poetry. So it's that idea of giving yourself the freedom to do this stuff. So good for you, Chase. I'm really pleased to hear that, because that's where true success and advancement comes from evaluating what we've done. And just pick up on your point about filler words as well. Filler words can be a problem if they're coming up 90% in one sentence. If they're coming up just every so often, that's usually okay. I'm not going to worry too much about that. But it's a good exercise in the early days to go, right, how many filler words did I pop in? But also, where did they come and why? What happened during that point there? Was I attacking the sound too quickly? Was I feeling as though I was talking about a subject I didn't know too much about, but I made it appear that I did? Was I being slightly inauthentic to myself there? Was I being slightly not particularly honest with myself? Could I have been better there? What was going on? So that exercise of tossing them up is good. Taking that further and going, when did it happen and why do I think it happened, is another good step just to analyze what you've done. So it's really great stuff.
I've never thought about the why, but as you brought that up, I immediately thought of like probably my most recent one is because the likes and the ums and the filler words, they all come in after I've spoken really fast, after I've had that moment of excitement, or I'm started talking, this is what I wanted to say, and then I go again.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it usually creeps in because you're attacking the sentence too swiftly. Or you might be slightly conscious of leaving dead sound or leaving no sound. You don't have to fill every single gap with sound. You can just take a break and step back. Let your thoughts sit there to be analysed. I think we think the more we speak, we're sort of covering over the sense of what we're saying. So we're holding back our thoughts, our opinions, our emotions underneath an avalanche of words. Because if I keep talking, I'm not going to give my opponents or the person I'm speaking to the opportunity to butt in. It's what I call the over-confessing child. They've smashed, a vase or a vase in the next room, and they run in, they tell you all about it, and they're just going to keep talking at you, because as soon as they stop talking, that's when the basic question of, well, why were you playing baseball in the front room? That's not allowed, or I can't believe you did this, or whatever. So the over-confession, just putting loads of words in, is a very, very short-term defense mechanism, but people do it because it's a knee-jerk place to go to.
Do you feel that the over confession and the over explanation comes from social media? Can be very, aha, gotcha, or your
Oh,
opinion's wrong, so let's all gang up. And especially when you do something in as public and as out there as speaking to guests who have, strong opinions, and I have strong opinions as well on, inside my private life. And when I first I express those. I'm very proud of my opinions and what they mean,
Great.
and I'm open to those being tweaked and subjected to differing opinions. Like, I want that, please. But when I first started this podcast, I was so reluctant to, like, I feel like a lot of my over explanation came from the fact it was like, well, I don't want somebody to take it this way. I don't want them to take it this way. And so as this podcast has grown and as I've grown, I've gotten a lot more comfortable in myself
Great.
and be
Excellent.
like, I can't, there's somebody can interpret this no matter how many different ways I say it. Somebody's going to interpret it the way they want. And so do
Exactly.
you feel like that has to come from a place of comfort and reps and just confidence in oneself?
Yeah, exactly. It definitely reps and confidence, definitely, but also thinking that our natural sense of politeness and civility and humility overrides a lot of these elements. I watch your podcast, I watch your content. I don't get a sense that you're a very angry, pointed, this is my opinion, nothing else matters, shouty, gotcha, gotcha, gotcha type of person. So it is that sense of just leaning into that idea of civilized conversation, recognizing before you begin that, well, A, you can't please everybody, and B, everybody's got different opinions, and that's fine. We can talk about them. You might change my mind. I might change yours. We might not. But I'm so happy that you've got your opinion. That's fantastic. I'm not going to stop speaking to you just because you like wearing baseball caps and I'm not wearing one. It's that sense. It's to go Chase is Chase, Miles is Miles, or whoever we're speaking to. And that's just them. And that's that great and glorious thing that that's an individual and a personality that I'm speaking with who is speaking in their own individual tongue with their own individual authentic voice. It's a great and beautiful thing. So taking the sting out of the tail before we begin, unfortunately, social media encourages us to think in this way, or it has, I suppose, over the past, 15 years, I suppose, 10, 15 years. I think that is slowly, very slowly diminishing in a number of ways. I think, and you probably know this more than anybody, Chase, the sort of the long form conversation is coming back into the public consciousness. This almost very sort of old style way of interviewing. If you think about the classic, you know, guest shows that there would have been in the sort of 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. So you have sort of Dick Caverts and people like that. And certainly over here, the Michael Parkinson show, he might have one guest for 40 minutes, 50 minutes, maybe an hour. And it's just them. It's not a sofa packed full of celebrities talking about that very orchestrated, produced, hilarious anecdote that happened on that movie set. It's actually a sort of conversation where we are seeking to get something out of somebody and to warm into that person and to see if there's any common threads or any crossovers and what are those crossovers. So it's a very interesting. So I've been thinking about that a lot lately, actually, and quite a few of my clients are now doing very long form podcasts, sometimes up to 2 hours, which is
Mm-hmm.
just amazing. And if you've got a good guest who is happy to speak for that length or a point of interest, it's very infectious to listen to because it's a meaningful, substantial conversation. It's a proper meal as opposed to a bag of potato chips.
Absolutely. Whenever I'm scrolling through podcasts that I want to listen to, if I see like a 20-minute one versus like a 3 hour and 30 minutes ones, 3 hours every time. Every
Yeah.
time. Give me that.
It's fantastic. And I love that. It's similar in that sense. I just want to get into and get immersed in something. This person seems of interest, or I'm not quite sure about their life, but if I sit with them for 3 hours, I think I want to get a very good, rounded, introductory opinion onto who they are. This may then tug on the heartstring of interest. I might want to find out more about that person. So it's sort of, and again, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, it almost takes us back to the sort of pre-digital age. If you think about any heroes that you would have had as a child or any heroes you've got now, you might see them in a movie or read them in a book, and you might think, what else have they done? And there's a sort of sense of exploration to go to your local library and find those books, or go to Blockbuster and see what other films they've made that are available, to really delve into that bucket of that person, of their work. I think you might find this with poetry as well. If you carry on doing what you're doing, and if you get another anthology of many different poets, you might find one poem that really clicks here. And you might think, gosh, who wrote that? Who are they? What made them tick? And start that journey. And those journeys come from exploration, usually from a conversation. And we all know what good conversations feel and sound like, don't we? We know when we've had a good conversation with somebody over a coffee, over a drink, over a meal, at a party, at a house party, a dinner party, or whatever. We go, actually, that wasn't just, you know, the weather and what I'm doing tomorrow. This was really, really something that's going to stay with me. They've given me an insight of something. And I think social media tends to quash that. But I think now we're all used to it. It's slowly starting to adapt to that way of thinking. And you're quite right. I think if I were presented with a 15-minute podcast and a 3-hour conversation, I would, have a bash at the 3 hours.
You in 20 minutes, I guess, the host, even, it's hard to get to know them, for them to even warm up. You don't even know their true selves until like 30-minute mark, when everyone's comfortable. You can get that back and forth. You learn their speeching, their speech patterns, like when they pause, when they elevate, and not to jump in. And that's when the conversation really starts to flow and gets a lot more exciting, in my opinion. And to your point, Ryan Holiday talks about reading a book to find your next book. So like, as you're reading, you're pulling out, topics, or the foreword, or the end, where they talk about these new subjects and these things, and you can kind of swing. He talks about swinging like a monkey from vine to vine, like you're finding your book in your next book. And I think that's pretty profound and a lot more engaging to read that way. I'm not reading because I have this stack of books on my nightstand that I want to get to. I'm reading to learn and to excite my mind. And I may find 2 or 3, in which case I do have that stack of books on my nightstand, but still I'm just reading to get engaged and to learn.
Yeah, it's great. And I love the way you put that. And I think it's that lovely idea of thinking, if I've ever read every single book on my bookshelf, then I'm doing something wrong. And that isn't the major objective, to go through in that way. And I really like that. It's a journey we're all on. And we might not get to the end if it's this idea, I've got to read every single book on my shelf. I don't think you encourage that sense of exploration and that sense of whimsy and that sense of adventure even, if you do look at it in that way. I think that's probably why I've never joined a book group. It's the pressure of reading a book like that. I'm not sure how I would respond. I've never been to one, so I can't really comment, but that's the one thing that puts me off, I think, is, this is the book that we've chosen. You've got to read it by next Wednesday. I suddenly think, gosh, I'm back at university or I'm back at school. How am I going to do this? That sort of level of homework where it just becomes a endurance game. And is really anything going in? I'm sure, it's horses for courses, individuals, but that's always been the thing that's put me off. Have you ever joined a book group or been in a book group or anything?
I have not. Funny enough, I'm in an apartment building, and I got a text last night like, "Oh, book group for the apartment building upstairs." I ended up not going. I'm particular about the books that I like to read, and I try not to be. I don't want to be snobby. I'm not snobby. Like, popular
Standard.
books are popular for a reason, but I don't want to read the rom-com romance AI generated book. Not like give me Pride and Prejudice. Don't give me whatever it is.
I know what you mean. How funny you had that through the door. That's very interesting. You'll perhaps have to go now. We've talked about it, and just report back and let me know what it's like.
Deal. You mentioned earlier, we're all great orators. We're all great in our head, and I definitely find that to be true. You know, shower thoughts are very much a real thing. I've got these great ideas. I am a great speaker. I'm Churchill, as you mentioned. I'm Martin Luther
Yeah.
King. I've got these great points and I can make them. And then I open my mouth and I fall short on all regards. Do you think that's something that we can actually live up to? Are we actually as great as we think we are in our heads, firstly? Or do we build that up? Is it skewed? And then can we actually become as good as we think we are?
Yes. To your latter point, I think the answer has to be yes, of course. It's that sense of anybody going to a personal trainer, okay? I think a personal trainer who's worth their salt to say, what do you want from this? I want to be fitter. What do you really want from this? Okay, I want to look better. Okay, why? Because I am single, I've let myself go, and I think that's holding me back. Okay, anything else? Going through that level of working out what it could be and what's behind the initial analysis is sometimes where the magic lies. And within that, that person has either fantasized or thought about what they wanted to do. They're just feeling quite shy and apprehensive about broadcasting that to the world, putting out in the ether, to go back to an earlier thought. And I think with that, we can be as good as we want to be or think we are. It's just getting it out of here and making those logical steps to what we need to do. So, for example, if I work with a very nervous person, actually, if I'm not working with the person I should be working with will never come to me in that sense because they're
Mm.
far too nervous to have the conversation. That nervous person might have to do a keynote speech at their office or a wedding speech or a eulogy at a funeral or speaking at some family event or their parents' golden wedding anniversary. They've been asked to do a speech because they are the oldest or the only child. That person will not prep for that speech because to prep for the speech is to admit to them that they are going to be doing a speech. And sometimes the act of I'm actually doing this is monumentally terrifying to them. So they won't do it. So they just live up here. And that one time they are speaking publicly and they're not quite meeting up to what's going up here, they will probably never do another speech after that. And that's a great, great shame. A huge shame. Our greatest prospects never normally knock on our door. So it is that idea of trying to break that down through education, through putting thoughts out online, say, look, we can get to this point together. You've got to admit to the fact that you're doing it. So whenever I'm working with somebody for the very first time, session one, be it in person or virtually, always follows the same pattern. I will get my client to present to me for the first 5 minutes of that call. And that will normally be very uncomfortable for them. Sometimes it's very uncomfortable for them. But once we've done it, we've aired it, we'll go, right, there's the marker, let's plow on. Here we go. This is it. This is your first episode you put out almost, it's that idea. So yeah, I think we can be as good as we like to think we are. I think we have to be, otherwise it's a very dull existence if we didn't
Yeah.
think in that way.
Far more demoralizing to think you have your limits and your imagination can't be achieved. Then what's the point of even imagining?
And you haven't even tried it, that's the thing.
Mm.
A life half-lived is a terrible thing. It's that idea of going, okay. And it's that lovely thought, and I think Chris Williamson mentioned this on a podcast, a client of mine a while ago. The most terrifying thing in the world is meeting the person that you could have been as you walk past them on the street. It's you who made a slightly different decision 5 years ago. And is there a better quality to shove you into that direction? Go, yeah, no, I'm actually going to do it. I am going to do this. It's one of those thoughts that, quite rightly should keep you awake at night in those senses, because it think, you are going to have a bash at this and just see what happens and prove to yourself and follow that thread through So yeah, that's that thought always rattling in my head somewhere. And if I, think about it, it's a great one. It's a great leveler with that.
My listeners are going to be annoyed that I've talked about this so much, but I, the Stephen Pressfield's The War of Art, phenomenal book. I love talking about it because he talks about the resistance, that force that you have inspiration, you have something that you could do, that you draw towards, but you never actually do it, whether that be a symphony that you have inside that you'll never actually write, or a podcast, in my case, that I know I've always wanted to start it for years and I never started, a book, whatever that is.
Mm.
And speaking, being a keynote speaker, whatever that is that you could do, and the resistance pushes you so hard against. Oh, you don't have anything to say. That you're not good at public speaking. You're not a good writer. Your friends will laugh at you. And it always talks about whatever that strongest resistance is, whatever you feel like you're touching a hot pan, whatever you draw back from, but you're drawn towards. That's the most
Um,
important thing that you need to be doing. And that's what will make it so you don't cross that person 5 years from now.
exactly. Yeah, no, that's really beautifully put. And it's, again, the thought of just living in your head like that forever is so torturous, really. It's so limiting. There is so much to do. And again, the other thoughts that always drive you forward is, we pass this way but once. If you're not going to try it now, then I can't help you. It's
Mm-hmm.
what are we going to do? What's the point of this thing? It's to I was a I've probably spoke about this a lot on podcasts, but I was a very shy child, and I used to worry a lot. I still worry a lot now, but not as much as I did when I was younger. And one of the biggest regrets of that is thinking, God, what a humongous waste of time that was. What opportunities I missed during then for just worrying about what somebody else thinks about me, that level of judgment. Can I do it? I don't think I can. I've got nothing great to say. So my status was always getting lower and lower and lower and lower and lower through these intrusive thoughts, which I know attack all of us wherever you are, whether you're really winning at a situation or it's not going quite so well. Problems are always going to be there, and part of it, they're never going to go away, but you can work at it in a slightly different angle. And yeah, that's something else that sort of reverberates from the past, the wasting of all that time, and the times I was silent when I could have been just contributing to a conversation, or heaven forfend, lead a conversation, and instigate some change, and to encourage a sense of relatability or comfort with somebody. It's the things you don't say that you remember sometimes. So yeah, that's a nice thought, Chase. Thank you for sharing that.
I had the opportunity to speak with Amy Morin. She's got a TED Talk with 25 million views, best-selling author. She talks about mental
Wow.
strength a lot. She's wonderful. She's very, very informed. And something she mentions is that these intrusive thoughts, as you say, these negative thoughts that pop in and tell you that you're not good enough, are not based in fact, and they will not be able to be trained away. What you can train is your
Mm.
ability to ignore them and to recognize the fact that they are not based in fact. Because that's the secret there. There's no there's no reason for these thoughts to be coming in. They will always be coming in. It's just you can
Mm.
recognize that they are just silly, negative, the resistance, if you will, to keep
Mm.
the language going, and act anyway, and still perform well, and still succeed.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also using them to your advantage, they're there to help cajole you. Yeah, I can blooming well do this. Thanks very much. I can. Yeah, of course I can. Sometimes that level of bravado that you can ricochet off for negative thoughts is incredibly powerful. So I don't think I want to get rid of them completely. I quite
Mm.
like a little, the door left ajar rather than sort of locking it and forgetting about it. Because I think those sensations knock you in that good direction and help. with that, help make you march forward in a much more succinct and efficient and successful place. I think they can encourage you to go on the untrodden path. You can't do that. Just watch me. That idea. So yeah.
We've been talking a lot about ways to improve our ability to speak and to feel more confident and more comfortable. We haven't discussed why somebody should do that. Why should they care? Like, they can get their point across. What's the benefit in them for trying to improve their ability to speak?
I think first and foremost, it's to be heard. If you've got the world's most fantastic thought or level of insight or piece of education, but nobody can hear you say it because you might mumble, for example, you might not engage vocally, you might stumble across your words, you might be quite inaudible, then there's no point you speaking. I want those thoughts to be heard. And again, I take my mind back to that 7-year-old schoolboy, and the biggest points of feedback that used to really great with me would be somebody saying, I can't hear a word you're saying, speak up. Because that never helps. It never, ever helps the person who is trying to speak. I remember going red and stumbling over my words and speaking incorrectly again. They couldn't hear me the second time. The third time, they'll just admit defeat, pretend they'd heard me, and move on. So I was always thinking, I've got to find a better way of doing it. I've got to find my voice and not be so scared of it, to move out the shadows of shyness and to step out there. So to answer your question directly, it's just simply to be heard. If you can't be heard, then go and live as a mute monk somewhere. And if that's what you want to do, fine, do it. Great, fantastic. You carry on and do that. But everybody's got their own stories to tell, their own opinion, their own way of looking at life based on their experience. And that's what it's all about. It's learning off others through what they've been through, what they've done, what they've discovered, which makes life and conversation and stories all about. It's that idea. So why should people do it? It's to be heard. It's to put your voice out there. It's to telegraph your emotion to the world. It's to telegraph those thoughts and stories that you have, which may change somebody's life. And you never know what that is. It usually comes out from a throwaway conversation sometimes.
Mm.
And somebody thinks, wow, I've never ever thought of it in that way. And that's how that change can happen. And that's how connections are built. It's how relationships are built. It's, being heard is paramount, in my opinion.
My rule of thumb is I'm only going to say what twice until I just smile and say, yeah.
It's that awful time when you don't catch someone's name and say, sorry, what's your name again? One more time. Oh, great. And then the rest of your life is spent avoiding that person.
Exactly. Or referring to them as man, or hey, good to see you, buddy, or something.
Hey, you, wow. Just thinking about you the other day. Or if you've got a very supportive partner or a spouse, they will introduce themselves to them, and if they've never met them, and then you can just stand on the sidelines and listen and go, oh, it was John.
Exactly. I heard this. If I heard this, I can't remember where I got this, but it's whenever you're in that position, you ask them for their name. You're like, oh, what was your name again? And they're going to be like offended. They're like, my name's John. And you're like, no, not your first name, John. I meant your last name.
I love that. Yeah, it's so funny. It is so funny. And then you just spend the rest of your life ignoring them, or the rest of the party thinking, well, I've got to go to the toilet, I've got to run the gauntlet to go to the bathroom, think I have to try and sort of sly around, but yeah.
Exactly. So speak up, speak clearly, let people know your name so we don't have to avoid you.
Yeah, exactly. For social embarrassment. Exactly right. Yeah. Because otherwise you are just calling people man and you and great, it's this guy.
Well, Myles, in your opinion, somebody who I know it's going to be very situational, but what would be the most prolific, the best thing that somebody can start doing to move the needle in terms of their speech? Is it their posture, their presence, their pause, their volume? What would it be?
If pushed, I would say posture, I would say, is a great place to begin because lots of great things happen there. The outwardly persona you can change. If you're walking around like this all day, your default focus is always going to be down.
Hmm.
But if I can just roll my shoulders in my back pocket, my default focus is up. For me to look down feels peculiar, therefore I'm not going to do it. So already, and I might be feeling deep down the lowest status level in existence. I could have been having the worst day. I feel very shy. I feel very intimidated. But if I can appear to be looking much more confident than I am, I'm going to fool myself, and lots of great things will grow from just having a good posture. And what I mean by just having good posture, just standing in the middle of the room or standing in front of a full-length mirror, having your feet about hip width apart, soft knees, lower that center of gravity, feel grounded, feel anchored to the floor. Not statuesque, I don't want you to be sort of solid, but feeling grounded and comfortable means that lots of great things can grow from there. Status level, voice production, you invite people in. This is a nice, open, vulnerable space where all great stories and conversations happen from this sense of openness and vulnerability. Nobody wants to talk to this person who breaks eye contact every 2 seconds. This here is what it's all about. And people say stand up straight, they just do this. I always say roll your shoulders into your back pocket. Deadlift position for you fans of fitness out there is the most present you can be before you bend down to pick up the barbell. So just recognize that position. And if you are a fan of going to the gym and the fitness, next time you're about to do a deadlift, just clock yourself in the mirror before you bend down and just register what's going on. Because there's a reason why that's the position before you bend down to pick up the weight. You feel engaged, you feel you're not tense, you're all relaxed, but you're solidly relaxed, I would say, and open to take on what's going on. So posture, most certainly, because all the good stuff grows from there. And again, modern life encourages us to look
Mm-hmm.
down on our phones, and it's this idea. So yeah, posture.
I was reading about the great Roman orators, and I don't know if this is true, but they talked about the Roman orators, they would have this presence, have this posture, but something that they had in Rome was they would have hand gestures to also pair with their speaking that was signal emotion. So like anger, sadness, empathy, and they would make those, and that's why the front of the crowd was always so vied for, is because you could get so much more
Oh.
from the speech because they paired their words not just with the inflection, but also with this learned hand gesture that would go along with it.
Yeah, it's exactly right. It's fantastic, that idea, that lovely technique, really, just to not just hold yourself, but to telegraph the emotions that you're feeling physically, but all growing from this nice, solid position of just holding yourself, you know. Otherwise, you are just building your dream house, your dream mansion on lollipop sticks, you know. It's just going to collapse down, or popsicle sticks, sorry. It's this sense of just, it's not going to work. You're not going to sustain a conversation or a meaningful presentation at work even from an unstable foundation. And so sometimes I work with clients and we just stand in the middle of the room, just recognizing this new sensation, this new feeling, finding their effective point of neutrality so they can start from here as opposed to from down here and warming up throughout the meeting. If you can find this place to return to, almost like a safe space, like a safe posture place to go back to, just helps you grow from there. And there's lots of other good stuff that happens with a good posture. But from the main point of just appearing more confident than you may feel is a very effective space to be. You can change your status level so easily from a 1 to an 8 just by engaging in a situation, feeling as though you're 4 inches taller, pulling up from the hips, and just start to own the space or be present in the space. And presence is always the closest bedfellow of authenticity. So if you're comfortable with what you're saying and how you're saying that, match it with how you're holding yourself, and you're not going to do too badly, I would say.
I'm talking to people smarter than me every single podcast, and yet here I am struggling to record these stupid intermission breaks. Guys, do me a favor, leave a review, leave a follow, leave a subscribe, whatever that looks like with the platform that you're on. I don't want to do this. You guys don't want me doing this, but it helps a ton. It lets me find more listeners. It lets the show get pushed out to more people. And in turn, I get more guests for you guys to listen to. I really appreciate y'all. I'm just stumbling my way through this. You guys are awesome. Thank you very much. Let's get back to the episode. I've heard you talk about, and I believe you addressed it as the TED Talk curse or the TEDx curse, where they're always pacing. And obviously there's a lot of great TED Talks out there where they come off as very, very powerful, very, they're great at giving that talk, and people think that that's what they need to do to also be great. They need to pace back and forth. They need to do this and that. Explain that to me.
Yeah. So I don't mind people moving. That's absolutely fine. And I think the issue that I sometimes have, or sometimes any coach will have, somebody will come to you, a potential client, and say, I want to be like X person. So somebody might usually comes to me and say, I want to be like this person who did their TED Talk. And this person is walking around, owning the space. We hear what they're saying. It works perfectly well. And I always have to stress to say, yes, they've been working with their speech coach for about 8 months to get to that point where it looks effortless and they are owning the space. And then we re-review that that TEDx talk of that person speaking. And I'll say, yeah, but look when they are moving. They're not just moving for the sake of moving. They're moving because they can justify it and it makes sense to what they're saying. They're not just walking around because it looks good, because that's just silly and pointless. But you sometimes find people will copy that and think, oh, that person was very good. What were they doing? Moving. Okay, next meeting at work, I'm going to walk around the office and people got to sort of catch up with me as I walk behind them and this sort of thing. So that person can move. I'm always happy to bring movement into a keynote as long as you can justify it. Because a person who doesn't justify it usually starts to sound by standing there and I'll say, good morning, everybody. It's great to see you. And they'll step back. They'll step away from the audience. They'll step away from the mic. They'll step away from us. And all I'm going to do in the audience, as everybody else will, they'll think, okay, this guy looks good, but why is he stepping back when he's saying, good morning, I'm so excited to be here? Is he not excited to be here? Does he want to leave? What's happening? And as soon as I'm asking myself those questions, I start to unstitch and undercut any confidence this person thinks they are beaming forward through just moving in an abstract sense. So the curse of TED Talk is when you see somebody who's very good at their TED Talk and it's very good and there's a sense of movement in there. The unintended curse of that, the symptom of that, is somebody thinking they were good because they were moving. That's what I'm going to do on my next meeting. And shock horror, it doesn't quite work because it's not justified with what they're talking about.
Walking's okay if you can justify it, or moving's okay if you can justify it. Some of the things off the top of my head that I think may justify it, and I'd love to hear some for you, is like the size of the group that I'm speaking to and the size of the place that I'm speaking to. I want to make sure everybody's involved. I don't want to stand in one place and speak straight ahead. I want to, walk to the right and get them involved. But if I'm in a crowd or a group of, 4 people at the office, there's no reason for me to be walking back and forth. What would be some other justifications for movement?
So other justifications could be if this person is talking about an anecdote or something that happened to them, they might start to almost perform that particular act. It could be used as a good sense of scene shifting, changing the environment that they're in, taking us back to a different time.
Yeah.
Sometimes that look of movement will move us physically and then vocally. It's a good change up for that person to then use that to add a sense of variety to their story because they're calling back to something that happened in the past or something that's happening in the future. There's a lot of exposure from us standing there in front of somebody and speaking, but again, a lot of power. You draw attention because it's just you and the world speaking. And again, it just highlights and heightens that point of you being so clear of your narrative, of what you're talking about and why you're talking about it. So the opportunities to move will come from those particular moments. So again, adding a sense of variety. Okay, that sounds great, that's good, but can you stitch that into something that's going on in the story that physically instigates a sense of variety or a sense of change that I can buy into as an audience member because the speaker or the storyteller, I should say, has already bought into that idea too. If that storyteller is engaged in the story and engaging in the audience, I usually can't help but feel engaged myself because I get it. I get it.
That makes a lot of sense. I even when the example you brought up, like going back in the past, like just like bring your hands up and like walking back and be like, and
Yeah.
taking it back to like my early years or whatever, and just getting
Exactly.
people involved. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and again, people might think, "Well, I'm performing. I'm going to be performing." I think, well, yeah, you sort of are performing anyway, because you're standing in a theatre in front of people looking at you. So a sense of performance has already been bought into at some level. Okay. And then working with me or another speech coach or whoever, we can then rehearse this and feel what it means. And I can be there not just as the coach, but also active sounding board and an audience member. I might go, actually, stop there. Why are we moving? Oh, well, I just thought we should add something in. Why? Because I felt uncomfortable standing in one space for a few moments. Okay, why? Because I haven't really thought about this part of the presentation. Okay, right. Okay, let's go back to the text. Let's go back to the story. Let's make sure we are fully aligned and we understand what we're saying, and then we can grow from there. So it's that idea. And again, I encourage anybody who's listening to this and of your audience, if they have a favorite TEDx speaker or TED speaker, TED Talks, just look at them and see what they're doing and ask themselves, why do I like it? Why is it good? And force yourself to answer those questions. And then you'll be able to understand what they do and how effective it is that they're doing it, and use that in your experience to then perhaps come into your next presentation at work, for example. So be much more evaluative and analytical on why we like something. We always know why we don't like something, but why do we like something? And just forcing yourself to have a response to that. If it's because it's visually pleasing to see somebody walking around the stage, on some plane, I understand that. I get that. But I'd rather start from a semi-solitary position where there is a sense of movement. That's why I always say I don't want people to feel like they're a statue. You can change weight into one leg, into another. There will be a natural sense of movement, because if it's just still and statuesque, it's very unnatural. So bringing in these ideas and seeing how they work and just trying them out. Walk around you know, the living room and see how it feels.
Yesterday, I was writing in my journal, and I wrote, I was reflecting on the podcast and speaking and asking questions, and something I wrote was just simplify, simplify, simplify. And I was thinking of like fine dining and going to like these Michelin star restaurants. You have these dishes that are so delicious and so beautiful, but
Mm.
also so simple.
Yeah.
And I wanted to like bring that to the questions that I ask and to the way that I speak into the podcast, not because because that's where the meat is, that's where the beauty is, and that's where people are listening and getting stuff from. Is I don't get bonus points for asking the question in the most difficult and roundabout and with the most diverse vocabulary, and try to use a word should be earned and should be used when it's appropriate, not to show it off. And that's something I'm really trying to bring.
Quite right. I think using things for the sake of isn't a very effective tool. I'm just doing this because it sounds good. I'm doing this for the sake of doing it. No. Give me some meaning about why. And again, taking that thread, it's something I ask my clients all the time when we're preparing for something or just going through a level of coaching. It's a sense of, why are you delivering this today? Oh, because I've got to. And I'll think, you can't wear that as a motivator. Because I'm not going to wear that as a motivator as an audience member. And these people, we can spot them out when that's their intention. I'm doing this because I was made to. Again, it's like the child who's been said, right, can you go and tell everybody dinner's ready to bring everyone into the room? Mum says it's dinner time. Can you all please come into the other room? You know, the intention there is, I'm doing this, I've been told to. I want to be somewhere else. So finding the justification and the meat behind it makes it grow into something much more memorable, enjoyable, and authentic to do, because you're doing it for a purpose. You know, why are you doing this? I'm doing this because it's going to change somebody's life. Okay, great, brilliant. Right, we can work with that. How's it going to change their life? Whose life is it going to change? What's going on with their life beforehand? What's happening here? Where is that movement of ideas? It's almost, you know, we can take our minds back to theatre of like Broadway in the turn of the last century. Okay, a musical on Broadway would just be a scene, and then a arbitrary pop song of the day would just be plopped in the middle. It wouldn't advance the plot. It wouldn't move anything along. It was just there for the sake of being there. So it was popular at the time. You know, the evolution of the American musical theatre comes from when you bleed and blend the song into the narrative. So there is a change with the character before they start singing, and there's a change in the situation after they've stopped singing. Something has moved on. What's happened before? What's happened after? What has moved? What has moved the narrative into its next phase? And the same can be said when we're doing presentations at work, pieces to camera. It moves you out of this sense of, I'm just doing this as I've got to. It makes it more meaningful, and it gives it a much more naturalistic, story-led intention.
You mentioned Chris Williamson as a client, obviously one of the biggest podcasters in the world, and extremely admirable in terms of the way that he does what we've been discussing. He's very concise. He uses words when they apply and when they add to the conversation. Very, very great at what he does. One of the best, as his popularity shows. Well earned. What tools have you put into his pockets to help bring that out? Because I know you speak about, I don't want to be Chris Williamson. I don't want to be, Churchill. I don't want to be any of these people. I want to be a better version of me, and I want to bring my personality out, and I want to speak the way that I can. What are some tools that you've put into his pocket that allowed him to be the best version of himself?
Great question. So I've been working with Chris for a long time, 5 years, I think, in total at the moment. And one of the first ports of call that we had, or that I wanted to bring into his way of thinking, was what we've already discussed in this call, and remembering that every interview, every presentation, every podcast appearance, it's just a conversation between two people. It's not a big conversation with 1,000 or 1,000,000 or 2.5 million people at once. It's that level of intimacy that comes from just merely having a conversation and remembering what those good pillars are of a good conversation: accepting offers, presenting an offer back to the other person, letting them take it, and then presenting another one back, building upon what's been said. That then encourages us to be good active listeners, because we're not just going through our pre-prescribed list of corporate interview questions. You know, what's brilliant about you, Chase, is that you're a great active listener. Okay. You're listening to what I'm saying. You're picking up on things that I have said or may have said or have said in the past, and bringing that in, because an audience will never forgive you if you just glide over or ignore something that's been said where there may be some real meat or some more substance or something to really add to the conversation. So starting with that abstract point of it, it's a conversation. It's merely a conversation. We know how to have good conversations because we have them all the time. How can I bring this into the podcast field? How can I bring this into the speaking on the world stage field? How can I bring this into my theatrical performances, which are now part of what Chris does? Okay, he's not just a podcaster now. These are live shows. He's an international speaker now, speaking on these humongous stages, humongous, in a very short space of time, which is amazing. Which is incredibly admirable. I'm full of respect and admiration for him. And he's a fantastic guy, first and foremost, and just wonderful to work with. So taking those bare points of it's just a conversation, which again feels so basic, but everybody's forgotten it. And it's worth bringing that onto the table. So that's definitely one of the big portions of his toolkit, that idea. And again, this sense of just letting the sound sit there, giving yourself space and room to maneuver, and also being brave enough to say that, actually, I don't know that book. I've never heard of that person. Tell me more. It's very refreshing. We all like to sometimes appear that we are more intelligent than we're letting on sometimes. And that then comes on a nice slice of inauthenticity and a slice of falseness, because you're ultimately starting a lie almost. That feels quite unsettling. When someone says, you read this book? Yes, yeah, of course I have. Yeah, great book. Yeah, fantastic. You are quickly found out, by the way, with that. But also that's how, learning and the transference of art and the transference of interest happens from that point of, I've never heard of that. Like you, I'm going to buy that book and read it. I've heard Myles talk about it. I'm going to buy that and look at it. Equally, some of the stuff you said on this call, I would definitely look at after. It's this sense of, I'm not aware of this, but it's affected somebody in a very, very important way. It bears me giving it some space and time. I respect the person I'm speaking to because they're being honest with me. I feel as though I can be honest with them. It's like your friend who you say, have you seen this film? Oh, yes, I've seen this film. And they've never seen this film. You just know they haven't seen it, but you play along with them for a bit. And then you finally get to a point where they say, oh, no, I've seen the trailer. I haven't actually seen the film, and you think, oh, why don't you just say?
Yeah.
So it's those ideas that we've explored first and foremost, which then open the floodgates into other areas, reviewing podcast episodes, for example, and that sort of thing. So it's this idea of, it's a conversation, basking in the authority of stopping the sound and just feeling as though you can interject and say that you haven't read or heard of something, or just politely butt in to a conversation with your point of view or your level of insight that's going to help bolster what's happening there.
I think that's extremely important. And it's funny enough, the reason I started my podcast and the reason why I always wanted to is I've been listening to podcasts back, 2014, 2015, started with Tim Ferriss and, all these OG podcasters.
Yeah.
And I would always listen and I'd be like, this guest just said something fantastic and you didn't dig into that. You just went right over it. And it was so frustrating to me.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I want to ask the questions because I want to know what he meant there and I want to dive into that more.
We're
And when I
always
first,
baying for blood, aren't we? As an audience, we're always baying for blood. We want to see our heroes in disastrous situations and see how they get out of it. So you're quite right. It's so frustrating when that happens, when someone glides over something explosive and just carries on to the next question. It then becomes a corporate interview, doesn't it?
yeah,
When
exactly
that's
right.
on film.
And that's why my whole philosophy when I do these is I do my research. I inform myself about the guests. I read their books if they have them. I watch previous podcasts or read articles. And then I only script my first question. I want something to get the conversation going. And then from there, I have no notes. I don't have anything in front of me. I'm just listening and I'm engaging.
Fantastic. You're just reacting to what's going on, which is a great way to be. A great way to be.
Well, Myles, I am really appreciative of your time today. It was a great conversation and a great pleasure. And I have a tradition where at the end of every one of my podcasts, I ask my guest two questions. The first is, who do you think I should speak with next and why? And then the second is based off of a Emerson quote. If you encounter a man of rare intellect, we should ask him what books we read. So what book would you most recommend?
Wow, these are great questions. What book would I recommend? I've already recommended the poetry book, but
You
what else
have.
would I recommend? I would actually recommend that you go back to a book that you loved when you were younger. A storybook, like a novel, not the sort of, ABC 1, 2, 3
Mm-hmm.
books, but a book when you were probably like 7, maybe your first sort of storybook in that sense. So it could be, like for me, it was that Just William and Enid Blyton and Beatrix Potter and that sort of thing. Return back to that book or a novel that you remember from when you were very small, and it could be Goosebumps or something like that, and just reread it and dive back into it and just try and garner some wonderful things from why you loved it so much, because stories stay with us forever and we
Mm-hmm.
love them for a reason. And books that we read when we were very small are very pertinent, and there's usually some great stuff in there. So it's a joy to return back to them and again ask yourself some of the questions that we've asked ourselves on this conversation today. Why do you like it? What's going on here? Because sometimes it could have been a book that was written for your parents' generation or the generation beyond there. And the writing structure is sometimes monumentally different to what it is now. And again, it's a good case scenario to bolster one's vocab sometimes from a book that was written 60 years ago, but was meant for children of that era. It's quite a nice
Absolutely.
exploration. So that's what I would challenge you to remind yourself of what that book was. Who should you speak to next? What a great question. Who should you speak to next? I I would say the historian Andrew Roberts, Lord Andrew Roberts. He's a fantastic historian, and I've seen him speak a number of times, and he's fantastic. He wrote the most recent biography of Winston Churchill, which is a magisterial read. I encourage you to
Mm-hmm.
read that. It's another book to put on there, just to add to all these answers I'm giving you. This is it's a fantastic book and a fantastic read. And he's a very, very interesting chap, and he bakes everything in shock horror research. So it's which some historians don't tend to do, or people who like to think they're historians. And he's a great storyteller with that, and he sets things in context very neatly. And he's a fantastic orator. So yeah, that's who I would suggest.
I would love to speak to him. And I mean, I love history and it sounds like he specializes in or takes great interest in World War II era if he's writing about Churchill. So that would be tremendous. Like, sign me up
Yeah,
for that.
yeah. I encourage you to get the book because
Yeah,
it's very good, and Churchill was just such an interesting character. To boil down to a very basic form, he's more than an interesting character. He's an absolute wonder. But it goes into his childhood in great detail, and the letters that he writes to his parents are just heartbreaking. They are, please, please come and see me at school, and it's just, yeah, that the relationship with him and his father is again something that Chris has talked about fairly often. Actually, that particular anecdote. So yeah, that's a great sense of exploration we're going to go on to with Andrew Roberts in that book. Walking with Destiny, that's the book. Churchill Walking with Destiny. It's a nice thick read, but it's a very, very readable, enjoyable read. It's a real great treat.
I can't remember. It was a old Roman philosopher, but he talks about a great author you shouldn't struggle to read a great author. So if you're reading, you know, philosophy or history or whatever that may be, the subject may be dense, but it should still be enjoyable to read, and that's a
Yeah.
reflection on the author and the ability to
Quite
write.
right. Quite right. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Well, Myles, again, thank you so much for your time. You're based in the UK, you're in London.
Yeah,
But
just outside London. Yeah.
where can people get more of you? Where can people learn from you? And I know you do speaking and you're a speaking coach. Would you still be able to work with people over in the States, over in the US? Is that remote option available as well?
I remote and in person. My client base is probably wider in the US than it is over here in the UK. So I'm very blessed with a nice international list of clients. So yes, traveling in person or virtual is completely available, and I'm very lucky to do both. You can find me on Instagram, and that's at Speak Well Coaching, and my website is speak-well.co.uk.
Myles, you have a great rest of your day, okay?
You too, Chase. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.